Probably no extinct ocean predator is more recognizable than Megalodon. Part of that comes from how easy it is to imagine. A familiar shape, taken to an almost unreasonable scale. Most of what remains are teeth, but those teeth are enormous, serrated, and instantly recognizable. For an animal known mostly from fragments, they give Megalodon a presence that feels unusually real. The real animal was terrifying enough without turning it into a myth. Megalodon was one of the largest marine predators ever known, probably an active, high-energy hunter, and recent reconstructions suggest it may not have been just a gigantic version of a great white shark, but something longer, stranger, and more specialized than the image most people have in mind. Megalodon was real, enormous, and terrifying. But it came late in a much older story. By the time it appeared, the oceans had already spent hundreds of millions of years producing predators that were not just large, but dangerous in ways a giant shark could never fully represent. That older story begins in the Middle Triassic, around 244 million years ago, in seas still recovering from the worst extinction Earth has ever experienced. The world was still living in the long shadow of the end Permian extinction. On land and in the sea, life had been broken down on a scale almost impossible to picture. Entire ecosystems had collapsed, and the oceans that followed were not simply empty blue spaces waiting to recover. They were unstable, changing, and full of opportunity for the animals that could survive inside them. In what is now Nevada, the fossil record preserves Thalatoakon. More than 8 meters long, it may not rival the later giants in this story, but its timing is what makes it extraordinary. Only a few million years after the end Permian extinction, the seas had already produced an ichthyosaur, capable of hunting large vertebrate prey. Its body carried the basic ichthyosaur shape, long, streamlined, built for open water, but its skull and teeth reveal something more specialized. Powerful jaws, broad, compressed teeth, and cutting edges suited for slicing into other marine animals. Thalatoakon was proof that the ocean did not need long to become dangerous again. By the early Jurassic, ichthyosaurs had moved far beyond the first large predators of the Triassic. Temnodontosaurus belonged to that same broad world of air-breathing marine reptiles, but it was a more specialized kind of hunter. Some species reached lengths of more than 9 meters, with skulls that could exceed a meter, long jaws lined with conical teeth, and enormous eyes among the largest known in any vertebrate. Those eyes are what make the animal feel different. Temnodontosaurus was not just a large body moving through the water. It was built to track prey through open seas, including conditions where light could fall away quickly. And its prey was not limited to small animals. Fossil evidence suggests that at least some species could feed on other ichthyosaurs, including smaller Stenopterygius. Its fossils also preserve signs of a hard life, with healed injuries and bone trauma suggesting violent encounters during life. Temnodontosaurus shows a different stage in the history of marine predators, not just size, but a body increasingly shaped around finding, chasing, and catching prey in open water. Later in the Jurassic, marine predation also took a heavier, more brutal direction. Unlike Temnodontosaurus, Pliosaurus funke brought a different kind of threat. A huge skull, powerful jaws, and thick teeth suited for gripping and tearing large prey at close range. The animal became famous as Predator X, surrounded by early claims that its bite may have been 4 times stronger than that of Tyrannosaurus rex. Those estimates were almost certainly exaggerated, and the fossils are too incomplete to support the most extreme versions of that story. But the reality preserved in the fossils is still formidable. Pliosaurus funke was still one of the largest pliosaurs ever described, a short-necked marine reptile with 4 powerful flippers, a massive head, and a feeding system centered on force. Even without the exaggerated numbers, it likely had one of the most formidable jaws in the Jurassic seas. By the late Cretaceous, the great pliosaurs were gone, but the oceans had not become any less dangerous. The role of giant marine reptile predator had shifted into a different group, mosasaurs. These were not close relatives of ichthyosaurs or pliosaurs. They were marine squamates, distant relatives of modern lizards and snakes, that turned the warm Cretaceous seas into hunting grounds. Among them, Tylosaurus was one of the most imposing. One of its most striking species, Tylosaurus rex, was recognized from fossils that had already been collected and previously assigned to other tylosaurs. The animal itself lived around 80 million years ago in the Western Interior Seaway, a vast sea that split North America in 2. Estimates suggest it could reach about 13 meters in length, making it one of the largest known mosasaurs. The name rex gives the animal an almost theatrical weight, and in this case, the name was not chosen only for size. Tylosaurus belonged to a branch of mosasaurs with a distinctive toothless projection at the front of the jaws, giving the head a profile unlike that of most marine predators. In Tylosaurus rex, that skull was combined with finely serrated teeth, powerful jaws, and strong neck musculature. This was not simply an animal that bit down hard. It was built to seize large prey, cut into it, and use the head and neck as part of the feeding strike. With the end Cretaceous extinction, the last great marine reptile predators vanished from the oceans. Mosasaurs and plesiosaurs disappeared, and with them ended a pattern that had shaped marine ecosystems for much of the Mesozoic. Giant reptiles as some of the sea's most dangerous predators. When that role returned in the Eocene, it belonged to a mammal. More precisely, to one of the strangest early whales ever found. Basilosaurus was a whale, but far from the image we usually have of whales today. Its body was long, narrow, and almost serpentine, moving through the Eocene seas more like a giant marine serpent than a modern whale. It had powerful jaws and teeth suited for cutting and crushing, and could reach around 15 meters in length. A vast predator, longer than many of the marine reptiles that had ruled the seas before it. And that scale becomes even more remarkable when you remember where whales came from. Only around 15 million years earlier, their ancestors were still small, hoofed mammals living near shorelines. By the time of Basilosaurus, that same lineage had produced a predator comparable to the size of a modern bus, large enough to hunt other whales. And the evidence is unusually direct. Fossil stomach contents from Basilosaurus isis include remains of juvenile Dorudon, another early whale, along with a large fish. It is one of the clearest snapshots we have of an Eocene predator at work. A recently marine mammal lineage already hunting its own kind. By the Miocene, Megalodon finally enters the picture, but it was not entering an ocean with no competition. By this point, whales had become far more diverse than the strange Eocene forms represented by Basilosaurus. Some were filter feeders, some were deep diving specialists, and some had moved in a very different direction. Livyatan was one of them. It was a sperm whale, but nothing like the deep-diving squid hunter we know today. Estimated at roughly 13.5 to 17.5 meters long, Livyatan had a massive skull and enormous functional teeth in both jaws, built not just for holding prey, but for cutting into large vertebrates. This is where the comparison with Megalodon becomes unavoidable. Sharks and whales come from lineages separated by more than 400 million years of evolutionary history. And yet in the Miocene, that distance almost collapses. A giant shark and a predatory whale ended up in the same oceans, solving the same problem with completely different bodies. Both were hunting large marine animals. One came from cartilaginous fish. The other began as a small terrestrial mammal. But in Miocene oceans, both had become answers to the same predatory pressure. That does not mean turning them into two movie monsters, locked in constant battle, but they were enormous predators living in the same broad marine world, likely interested in many of the same kinds of prey. Direct encounters may have been rare, and the fossil record cannot show them to us, but it would be just as hard to claim they never happened at all. What we can say is more interesting than a simple fight. Megalodon was not alone at the top of that world. Somewhere in those Miocene oceans, a giant shark and a raptorial whale represented two very different ways of becoming terrifying. But after looking deeper into the history of marine predators, Megalodon starts to feel less like a final answer and more like one chapter in an older pattern. Long before Megalodon, that role had already passed through reptiles recovering after catastrophe, giants of the Jurassic seas, marine lizards of the Cretaceous, and mammals that turned the ocean into a hunting ground again. That is what makes prehistoric oceans so unsettling. Not that they produced one giant shark, but that they kept producing different versions of the same role. Predators from completely different branches of life, all shaped by the pressure to hunt at the highest level. Megalodon earned its reputation, but it was never alone in what it represented.